Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Let me introduce myself. My name is Siti Holila with ID number T2019 60 and 19. I'm from TBI1 from English Department of State Islamic University of Kiai Ahmad Siddiq Jember. So in this video, I want to explain about translation theory before the 20th century. The main focus of this chapter is the central, recurring theme of word-for-word and sense-for-sense translation, a debate that has dominated much of translation theory. The focus will be on a selection of the most influential writing from the history of translation. This includes Cicero, St. Jerome, Dolet, Luther, Dryden, Hitler, and Schleiermacher. So first, I want to talk about word for word or sense for sense. Up until the second half of the 20th century, translation century seemed look to a sterile debate over the triad of literal, free, and faithful translation. The distinction between word for word, literal, and sense for sense, free translation goes back to Cicero, 1st century, and St. Jerome, late 4th century, and forms the basis of key writing of translation. Okay, next theory from John Dryden. A very free approach to translation produced a reaction, notably from another English poet and translator, John Dryden, whose description of the translation process would have enormous impact on subsequent translation theory and practice. Dryden reduced all translation to 3 categories. First category is metaphrase, word by word and line by line translation, which corresponds to literal translation. Second is paraphrase, translation with latitude, where the author is kept in view by the translator so as never be lost, but his words are not so strictly followed as his sense. This involves more or less faithful or sense-for-sense translation. The third is imitation, forsaking both words and sense. This corresponds to wholly very free translation and is more or less adaptation. Dryden thus prefers paraphrase and suggests that metaphrase and imitation are avoided. Okay, next theory from Ethan Dolet. Other writers on translation also began to state their principles in a similarly perspective fashion. One of the first had been Ethan Dolet. He set out 5 principles in order of importance as follows. First principles, the translator must perfectly understand the sense and material of the original author. Also, he or she should feel free to clarify obscurities. The second principle is the translator should have a perfect knowledge of both as a source language and target language, so as not to lessen the majesty of the language. Third principle is the translator should avoid word-for-word renderings. Fourth is the translator should avoid latinate and unusual forms. The last is the translator should assemble and assemble words eloquently to avoid clumsiness. So the concern is to reproduce the sense and to avoid word-for-word translation. But the stress on eloquent and natural target language form was rooted in a desire to reinforce the structure and independence of the new vernacular French language. Okay, the next theory from Tytler. In English, perhaps the first systematic study of translation after Dryden is Alexander Fraser Tytler's essay on the principles of translation at 1797. Rather than Dryden's author-oriented description, right as the original author would have written had he known the target language. Tytler defined a good translation in target language reader-oriented terms to be that in which the merit of the original work is so completely transfused into another language as to be as distinctly apprehended and as strongly felt by a native of this country to which that language belongs as it is by those who speak the language of the original work. Tytler has three general laws of rules. The first rule, the translation should give a complete transcript of the ideas of the original work. The second rule, the style and manner of writing should be of the same character with that of the original. The third rule, the translation should have all the ease of the original composition. Tytler himself recognized that the first two laws represent the two widely different opinions about translation. They can be seen as the poles of faithfulness of content and faithfulness of form, or even reformulation of the sense for sense and word for word diet of Cicero and Estegero. Okay, the last theory from Schleiermacher and the valorization of the foreign. In 1813, the German theologian and translator Friedrich Schleiermacher wrote a highly influential treatise on translation, on the different methods of translating. Schleiermacher is recognized as the founder of modern Protestant theology and of modern hermeneutic, a romantic approach to interpretation based not on absolute truth, but on the individual's inner feeling and understanding. Schleiermacher first distinguished two different types of translator working on two different types of text. These are first the Dolmetscher, who translate commercial texts, the Übersetzer, who works on scholarly and artistic texts. The real question, according to Schleiermacher, is how to bring the short translation writer and the target translation reader together. So he moved beyond the issues of word for word and sense for sense, literal, faithful, and free translation, and considers there to be only two paths open for the true translator. Either the translator leave the writer in peace as much as possible and move the reader toward him, or he leave the reader in peace as much as possible and move the writer toward him. Schleiermacher. Schleiermacher's preferred strategy in the first, moving the reader towards the writer. Okay, that's all from me. My apologize if any mistake in my explanation, pronunciation, and my spelling. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.